Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 22. Beelzebub for the first time in Tibet. As the route proposed this time was most uncommon for the terrestrial three-brained beings of those days, and accordingly we could not count on the possibility of joining any caravan of theirs, I had, then, to organize my own caravan, and I began the same day preparing and procuring everything necessary for this purpose. I then procured some score of the quadruped beings called horses, mules, asses, and Chamianian goats, and so on, and hired a number of your biped favorites to look after the said beings and to do the semi-conscious work required on the way for this mode of travel. Having procured everything necessary, I set off, accompanied by Ahun. This time, we passed through places still more peculiar and through still more uncommon parts of the general nature of that ill-fated planet. And we also encountered this time, or there came within the sphere of our vision, a much greater number of those one-brained and two-brained beings of various forms, which are called wild, and which, in those days, came there from very remote parts of the continent Ashark, for the purpose, as it is said there, of hunting. The said wild beings there were at that period particularly dangerous, both for the three-brained beings there and for those forms of quadruped beings which your favorites, with the cunning proper to them, had already been able to make their slaves, compelling them to work exclusively for the satisfaction of their egoistic needs. And the said wild beings were then particularly dangerous because just at that period there was being crystallized in the presences of these wild beings that special function which arose in them, again owing to the abnormally established conditions of the being existence of the three-brained beings there. And about this special function I shall later explain to you in detail. The places through which our way went this time were then almost inaccessible to the three-brained beings of that period, chiefly on account of these wild beings. In those days it was possible for the three-brained beings to pass through these places only, as they say, by day. That is to say, when in the atmosphere of their planet the process of Ayeoyuoa proceeds in the active element Okidanoch. And they could pass by day because during this time of the Krentonalnian position of their planet in relation to the rays of their sun, almost all the wild terrestrial beings are in the being state called sleep. That is to say, in a state of automatic elaboration in their presences of that energy which is necessary for their ordinary existence, which elaboration of energy proceeds in them during just this time. Whereas in the three-centered beings there, on the contrary, the same is elaborated only when the said sacred property is not proceeding in the atmosphere. That is, during the period of the diurnity which they call night. So, my boy, because of this, it was possible for your favorites of those times to pass through these places only by day. At night, great vigilance and the use of various artificial shelters was required as a defense against these wild beings, both for themselves and for their goods. During the period of the aforesaid Krentonalnian position of the planet Earth, these wild beings there are wide awake and take their first being food. And since by that time they had already become accustomed to use for this purpose almost exclusively the planetary bodies of weaker beings of other forms arising on their planet, they were always trying, during that period, to get hold of such a being in order to use his planetary body for the satisfaction of that need of theirs. These wild beings, particularly the smallest of them, were at that time already, also of course owing to the abnormally established conditions of the ordinary being existence of the three-brained beings there, perfected as regards apprehendingness and cunning up to the ideal. In consequence of this, all along this second route of ours, we, and especially our workmen for the semi-conscious work, had to be extremely watchful and alert at night in order to guard ourselves, our quadruped beings, and our supplies. A whole gathering of these wild beings would form round our camp at night, having come there to provide themselves with something suitable for their first food. A meeting rather like an assembly of your favorites during what is called the quotation of stock prices, or during their election of representatives to some society or other, the nominal purpose of which is the joint pursuit of a means to the happy existence of all beings like themselves without distinction of their notorious castes. Although we kept logs burning brightly at night to scare these wild beings, and although our biped workers, notwithstanding that they were forbidden, destroyed with the help of the, as they are called, poisoned arrows of El Napara, those beings that came too near our camp, yet not a single night passed upon which what are there called tigers, lions, and hyenas did not carry off one or more of our quadruped beings, the number of which in consequence diminished daily. Although, my boy, this way back to the Sea of Beneficence took us far longer than the way by which we had come here, all that we then saw and heard about the strangeness of the psyche of your favorites during our passage through these places fully justified the extra time spent. We traveled under these conditions more than a month of their time, and finally we came upon a small settlement of the three-brained beings who, as it appeared later, had only recently migrated there from Pearl Land. As we afterwards learned, this settlement was called Sincratorza, and when this region was subsequently populated, and this same place became the principal center for all the beings of that region, the whole country also came to be called by the same name. The name of this place was afterwards changed several times, and now it is called Tibet. As we chanced to meet the said beings just as night was coming on, we asked them for, as it is said, a night's lodging. And when they gave us permission to pass the night under their shelter, we were very glad at the prospect of a night's rest, since indeed we were all so exhausted by the constant warfare with these wild beings that both ourselves, and especially for our biped workers, it was now imperative to pass at least one night in peace. In the course of the evening talk, it transpired that all the beings of this settlement belonged to the sect then famous in Pearl Land under the name the Self-Tamers, which had been formed from among the followers of just that religion which, as I've already told you, purported to be based on the direct instruction of Saint Buddha. There is no harm in noticing in this connection that the beings of that planet had still another peculiarity, which had long before become proper to them alone, and which consists in this, that no sooner does